at a 5-part series on Culture Shift, the Daniel Challenge. We just believe that Christians are faced with a very unique challenge today in our day and age and in our culture in our time, but it's not unlike what has been faced in past times. But we're faced with a challenge today because we're in a culture that is increasingly shifting, sliding away from everything we believe in, everything we value, everything we've stood for. And it's just getting harder, it seems, and to stand as followers of Jesus Christ. I mean, how are we supposed to navigate these cultural waters? How are we supposed to go to a school or work at a job or be a part of an organization that it is increasingly not reflecting our values and our standards and our beliefs, and in fact, in some instances, becoming very hostile towards those beliefs and values? I mean, how do we live as followers of God in a culture that is not friendly towards God? That's been the question. Well, we've been looking at a man named Daniel who was able to navigate that challenge. His story is found in the Old Testament book. It's a book found in the first part of your Bible that bears his name, the book of Daniel. I want you to find that, and I want you to look for chapter 5. And as you do that, I want to give you just a little bit of the background again to get you up to speed again. There was a time in Israel's history when the people of Israel rejected God as their king. They rejected God as their king. They shouldn't have done it, but they did. And so God allowed them to be attacked by and invaded by a foreign nation named Babylon and their king named Nebuchadnezzar. That foreign king, he came, he tore down their country, he tore down their capital city of Jerusalem, tore down all their defenses and so forth, and then he hauled off the people as slaves in captivity back to his nation of Babylon. And this guy named Daniel, whose book bears that name, this guy named Daniel was only about 16 years of age when that happened. And he and his buddies were among those who were taken as captives back to Babylon. Now, everybody was made slaves, but Daniel and his friends were actually taken into the royal court in order to be used as workers for the government, okay? They were to serve in the government as government officials. And what is so amazing about this book of Daniel that I believe has application for today is that it shows us how to stand firm in our faith even in a slip-sliding away culture, while at the same time making a spiritual impact on that culture. Shows us how to stand firm in our faith while at the same time being a person of influence upon the culture itself. Now, let me remind you what we've covered so far. In episode 1, we looked at how Daniel faced what we call the identity challenge. The first thing the Babylonians did when Daniel and his friends got there, remember, is that they changed their names. That's what Babylonians did. They did change their names in order to change their sense of self-identity, how they saw themselves in relationship to God. And we learned that culture's greatest goal is to change your identity. It's to get you to believe something that is not true about yourself and about your God and about your relationship to your God. And the question that we ask ourselves is this: will I let culture change me, or will I change the culture? Then in episode 2, we looked at what we call the worship challenge. That was the story of the fiery furnace, one of those favorite stories of ours, the fiery furnace. Remember that? And how this king, King Nebuchadnezzar, commanded these guys to bow down and worship, to value, to prioritize, not what they wanted to prioritize, which was God, but rather to value and prioritize and spend their time, their energy, their money on what he told them to prioritize and worship. And we learned that one of culture's greatest, if you will, the greatest test of culture is always to co-opt your worship. Culture is always to get you to worship, to value, to spend your time, your energy, your effort, your money on what it wants you to spend your time, your effort, your energy, and your money on, not what God asks you to spend your time, your effort, your money, to worship culture's things instead of God. Okay? And then we asked ourselves simply this, is will I bow down to culture? Will I stand up for God? Then in episode 3, we looked at what we called the mentality challenge. And that was the story of King Nebuchadnezzar. Remember that? When he went insane and then his sanity was restored. And we learned that culture's greatest project is to alter the way you think, to alter your worldview, the way you think about God and about yourself and about life and about everything. But that it wants you to see things the way it wants to see things. It wants you to believe that you don't need God because life's all about you. And it's out to change your mentality into thinking that way. But we said what we learned is that mentality leads to insanity. And so the question we had to ask ourselves is, will I humble myself before God, or will I be humiliated? Well, that brings us to the next chapter in Daniel's story, chapter 5. And here is what I think we're facing, what Daniel faced in chapter 5. I'm going to call it the deception challenge. I call this one the deception challenge. And in Daniel's day, and I believe in our day, culture's greatest illusion is to conceal the consequences. To conceal the consequences of your actions, to conceal the consequences of your decisions, to make you to believe that there are no consequences. It's to get you to believe that you are the exception to the rule. You can play with fire and not get burned. You're bulletproof, okay? It won't happen to you. The enemy of your soul will use culture with all of its baubles and all of its thrills and all of its pleasures and all of its promises to get you to make choices that will lead you farther and farther away from God. But in order to do that, it's got to get you to ignore the consequences of those choices, or be completely ignorant that there are any consequences to your choices. Okay, so that is what Daniel is facing. And so that's the deception, and I want us to look at it. I want us to look at that deception as we find it in the next chapter of this book of Daniel. You found it yet? Chapter 5. Here is how it begins. Many years later. We're going to stop there for a second. Many years later. I just want to get this in perspective here. You need to know that 30 years have passed since the previous chapter. These 6 chapters at the beginning of Daniel cover his whole lifetime in only 6 episodes. So they skip around. And this particular one, it's been 30 years since the previous chapter. And so by this time, as this one takes place, Daniel is now in his 80s, his early 80s. Okay, anybody willing to admit you're in your early 80s? Can I see your hand? Anybody here willing to admit? Okay, my father will. Would you stand up for a second, Dad? I want you to be able to get a picture each week of where Daniel was in his life. This is the stage of life where Daniel is as all of this takes place, okay? Thanks, Dad. You can be seated. I just wanted you to get a feeling for the culture shift is happening at every stage of our lives, folks. It doesn't matter what your age is. This is going to happen. It is happening to us. And this is where Daniel was. Now, notice Daniel's met this challenge now throughout not just the one king, but many kings. Do you notice it says King Belshazzar gave a great feast. What I wanted you to catch there is that, oh, wait a minute, I thought the king was Nebuchadnezzar. Well, you know what? Daniel lived so long, he faced this challenge so well that he lived through successive actual administrations. Kings, what had happened. So just bring it real quick here is Nebuchadnezzar was the king when Daniel was taken captive as a teenager and brought to Babylon. He was the longest reigning king and the most powerful king, but like everybody, he died. And when he died, his son became king, but he was promptly assassinated by, the guy that became king was assassinated by his own brother-in-law who wanted to be king. And that guy only lasted for 4 years before, like everybody else, he died, and he made his son king after him, but he got assassinated in just 2 months by a guy by the name of Nabonidus. Nabonidus wasn't even Babylonian. He was actually Assyrian. He was one of the people groups that the Babylonians had conquered, and he comes into the country, and he kind of worked his way up into the kingdom, if you will, by marrying one of King Nebuchadnezzar's daughters. So he kind of got in there. Well, he wanted to be king, so he assassinates the last guy, and he takes over as king. Well, you can imagine he wasn't very popular in Babylon. He didn't particularly like Babylon anyhow because he was from Assyria. So he went back to Assyria to rule this kingdom from there. And he left his adult son named Belshazzar in charge back in Babylon. Have you followed me now? So what I wanted you to see, Daniel's made it through successive kings. And now it's Nabonidus, but Nabonidus says his son left in Babylon in the capital there in order to rule the kingdom. And Belshazzar, maybe the grandson of the greatest king, clearly the son of the current king, decides that the best thing to do if you are left in charge of the kingdom is to throw a party in the palace. So that's what he does. It says there that he gave this great feast for 1,000 of his nobles. In other words, he got 1,000 of his friends. You know, they're only friends if you're drinking enough, you poured enough wine into them. But and they all get there and they have a party. I mean, they partied hardy. His philosophy was, let the good times roll. I mean, his theme song was, it's my party and I'll drink if I want to. I mean, that's what it was. So he throws this party at this palace for 1,000 of his friends, and it was a wild party. Notice what happened. While Belshazzar was drinking the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and the silver cups that his predecessor, maybe his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. He wanted to drink from them with his nobles and his wives and his concubines. And so they brought these gold cups from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, he drank from them. And while they drank from them, they praised their idols, okay, their false gods that are made with gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. In other words, they're having this party, and they're going to even mock the God of Israel by going into the museum where the treasury was. And see, when they had taken over Jerusalem, they had taken over Israel, they actually took out of their temple, think they came in and robbed everything out of the sanctuary. And they took some of the objects that would mean something, that were sacred, and they put them in their little museum. He says, I want you to go get those, and we're going to party with those. In other words, I am going to desecrate, make fun of that God. I'm going to take it. Think in terms of this. Let's get the communion cups from the church and use them as shot glasses. Okay, guys? Can you follow me on what was going on there? That's what Belshazzar was doing. Can you imagine a culture that would do something like that? Can you imagine a culture that would stoop to the point of desecrating things that were considered holy? Can you imagine a rock star putting in her concert a crucifix and acts like she's getting crucified in order to have a throne? Can you imagine a culture that would let somebody take a crucifix, put it in a jar of urine upside down, call it art, and stick it in a museum? Can you imagine a culture like that? If not, you haven't been awake. That's what was going on. That is what was going on. So Belshazzar's got a party. It's my party. I'll drink if I want to, and I'll desecrate anything I want to desecrate. That's what's going on. Now, that's the scene at the palace until God showed up. And God does different things at different times, folks. He did it this way. This is the only time he ever did it this way. But here's what we're told. Suddenly they saw the fingers of a human hand writing on the plaster wall in the king's palace near the lampstand. Now, I don't know if it was like the thing on the Addams Family, just the hand in, or if it was the arm up to here just appearing in there. I even thought, what about the hamburger helper gloved hand guy? You know, maybe I don't know. I don't know what it was, but somehow his hand appears and starts writing on the wall. And we're told the king himself saw the hand as it wrote, and his face turned pale with fright. His knees knocked together in fear, and his legs gave way beneath him. Interesting enough, that last phrase is literally translated, his loins let loose. And some think that that was their way of saying he lost his bodily functions. He was that scared. I mean, he is scared that much. The bottom line was, he's freaked out, and supposedly everybody else with him. So the king shouts for the enchanters, the astrologers, the fortune tellers to be brought to him. He said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever can read the writing and tell me what it means will be dressed in purple robes and in royal honor and have a gold chain placed around his neck. He'll become the third highest and the ruler of the kingdom. By the way, why the third highest? Because dad is number one, Belshazzar's number two, so the best he can offer is number three. He is scared to death, and he is grabbing anything he can grab. He asks these guys, come in, tell me what it is, tell me what it is. And let me just summarize what happens next instead of reading it. None of them could figure it out. None of them had any idea what in the world this handwriting on the wall meant. And the reason was very simple. All of the mysteries of God, only God knows the secret, folks. All of the mysteries of God, only God knows the secret of them. He is the one, catch this, he knows the secrets about your life. God knows the secrets about your life, but you'll never know them until you connect with God. He's the one who's got the book on your life. It's Psalm 139 that says, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before even one of them came to be. So you're never going to be able to figure your life out apart from God. Please understand that. You are never going to be able to figure your life out apart from God, because he wrote the book on your life, and you'll only know what's in that book if you get connected with God. And that's why these wise guys from Babylon had no idea how to figure out what this handwriting on the wall meant, because they weren't connected to God. So we read that the king grew more alarmed and his face turned pale. His nobles too were shaken. What's going on here is they have received a heaven-sent Warning. Catch that? A warning, an alarm is going off, but they don't know what to do about it. Think of it, the tornado siren is going off, but the danger is not a tornado. Rather, it is the deception of their culture that has convinced them there are no consequences to your actions. Live however you want to live. Do whatever you want to do. There are no consequences to your action. Just go for it. This warning siren is going off, but they are totally ignorant of what it means. And what I want you to hear today is don't fall for that deception. Recognize the warning for it. Don't fall for this deception that it won't happen to you. Don't fall for that lie. It's your body. You can do whatever you want. Don't fall for that lie that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Okay? Do not buy into the deception that there will not be consequences for your actions. You are not bulletproof. I don't care what the song says. Instead, here's the truth. Here's the prophetic reality. Every choice has a consequence. Please hear that. Every choice has a consequence. Every decision has a repercussion. Every decision you make has a repercussion. It has a consequence. Every path has a destination. You choose, you make a choice to start down a path in life. Understand this, that path will lead you someplace. Every path has a destination. Every choice has a consequence. Here's something, if you hear nothing else and learn nothing else today, would you please understand this? You are free to choose, but you are not free from the consequences of your choice. You are free to choose. Hear me. You are absolutely free to choose. God gave you that freedom. Isn't it a wonderful thing? God gave us the freedom to choose. You are absolutely free to choose. However, you are not free from the consequences of your choice. Listen, I am free to choose to eat ice cream and French fries, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the rest of my life. But I'm not free from the consequence of how short my life's going to be. Right? You are free to lie and manipulate all you want. You're just not free from the consequences of all that lying and manipulating. You're free to drink and drug and sext and seduce all you want. You're just not free from the consequences of doing that. But the deception of our culture is, oh, no, it won't happen to you. The deception of our culture is illusion is, listen, you're the exception to the rule. It happens to other people, but it won't happen to you, but it will. Every choice has a consequence. Every decision has a repercussion. One of the ways it's been said, I think, is more amazing than anybody else, came from a young girl named Anne Frank. Anybody remember Anne Frank? She was a little Jewish girl who was put in the Nazi concentration camps, and we have the diary of Anne Frank that's been kept for so long. Here's the way she put it. Our lives are fashioned by choices. First we make our choices, then our choices make us. That is a truth that we need to hear today in our culture. We are not exempt from the consequences. You are free to choose, but you are not free to choose the consequences of your choices. Every choice has a consequence. Every decision has a repercussion. Well, back to Daniel and his story. There's this alarm going off. There's a warning being sounded, and I want to listen to the warning for a minute. God was giving Belshazzar a warning, but Belshazzar and his wise guys weren't wise enough to know what it meant. His mother, however, had an idea. So we read that the queen mother came in. She heard what was happening. She heard to the banquet hall, and she says to Belshazzar, "Long live the king." In other words, that's what you had to say whenever you came into the presence of the king or the king's son who's in charge. And she says, I love this, "Son, don't be so pale and frightened." Basically, she said, "Son, get a grip, would you? Come on, boy. Get a grip on yourself." And then she begins to remind him about probably his grandfather. Some of your translations say Father Nebuchadnezzar. That's why we think Dad had married into the family and so forth, making him really his grandfather. She starts to tell him the story about Nebuchadnezzar again. And you remember that there was a guy named Daniel that helped your grandfather, helped Nebuchadnezzar. And so she says to him, "Listen, there is a man in your kingdom who has within him," I love this phrase, "he has within him the spirit of the holy gods." Amen. There's this guy that we all know something's different about him. There is a man in this culture. There's a man in this kingdom. And you know what? We all know something's different about him. Listen, are you going to be changed with the culture? Or are you going to change the culture? Are you going to be someone who has influence with the culture to where they say, there's something different about you? There is a man in your kingdom, said his mother, said the queen mother, that has the Spirit of Holy God on him. Go get him. And so we read, Daniel was brought before the king, and Belshazzar basically says to him, I've heard you're that guy. I've heard you're that guy, and I need your help. And so he offers him the same deal he offered the other guys, to give him all this wealth and all this position and all this power, to which Daniel responds, keep your money. That's not the way I do things. In fact, I'm going to explain this to you. But I'm going to explain it to you by reminding of you of something I told Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather. I'll do this for you, but it's not because I have the ability to do it. I don't have the ability to interpret dreams. I don't have the ability to interpret handwriting on the wall. God, however, does. And he's sending you a message, and because I am in connection with the God who is sending you the message, I can tell you what that message is. Okay? But here's the point. God's trying to warn you about something. God is giving you a warning, O king. God is giving your kingdom a warning. God is giving your culture, your nation, a warning. Are you listening? In order to explain that warning, again, he starts in with going back. He says, listen, Nebuchadnezzar did the same thing. Nebuchadnezzar, God sent him a warning sign. He was playing games with God too. So God sent him a warning sign. He didn't listen, so God let him go insane over it until he would listen to God, at which point God restored his sanity. And Belshazzar, he would have remembered that, because he would have remembered when Grandpa went nuts for all those years. And then finally he was restored. Okay? So Daniel continues, listen to me. Belshazzar, you're doing the same thing. You're doing the very same thing, but you just think there's no consequences for what you're doing. You're doing the very same thing, thinking it won't happen to you. Daniel says, this is the message of the warning. God's giving you warning. And so he goes on to say, this is the message what was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. Now I believe that the words of this handwriting on the wall are a prophetic warning, not just for Daniel's generation, but I think it's a warning for us. And that's why I think this book of Daniel is amazing in its application for us. I think it's a warning for our generation and our culture just as much as it was for Belshazzar. So I want us to look at each of these statements that are made in those words, what they mean, and what the warning was for Belshazzar, and how I think it's a warning for us as well. Began this way. This is what the words mean. Mene means numbered. That's literally what the word mene means. Numbered. It's a Hebrew word, and it means numbered. He says, God has numbered the days of your reign, and he's brought it to an end. In other words, Daniel was saying, Belshazzar, you don't seem to realize this, because you bought into culture's deception about consequences. So let me give it to you straight. Your days are numbered. Listen to me, your days are numbered. You only have a set amount of time. Just like your milk, you've got an expiration date, okay? So I kind of like that one. I thought you'd, okay. I just want you to write expiration date, okay? Because guess what? You have one too. Everybody is going to die. Everybody sitting here this morning, everybody listening on the radio today, everybody who ever watches this on the web, the truth of the matter is you are going to die. Now, aren't you glad you came to church today? Isn't that just a wonderful thing to hear? But it's true. We all live our lives with only a limited amount of time. Now, let me tell you why that's important. Let me tell you why we need to hear that warning. Anything you have a lot of, you tend to squander. Anything you know you've got only a small amount of, you tend to protect. Anything you got a lot of, you tend to squander. If you got a lot of money, you don't care if the lights get left on over the place and the doors are standing open and whatever the thermostat said, that's okay with you because it doesn't matter. But if you're wondering if you're going to be able to pay the next bill, you're going around going, turn off that light, come on, who messed with the thermostat? What's with you people? Do you think you were born in a barn? Why is the door open? Am I the only one that grew up that way? Isn't it true that when you have an unlimited thing, you squander it, but when it's limited, you tend to protect it. We're always more conscientious of things we believe we have a limited amount of. Now, here's what I want you to do. If you tuned out for a second, would you turn in for a second? I always want you to listen to me. I want you to imagine that you went to your doctor this week. If you don't have one, imagine the miracle that you could actually get a doctor in this town. So imagine you went to a doctor, and the doctor's run all the tests, and it's conclusive. It's absolutely undeniable. He comes in and says, here's the deal. You have 30 days to live. That's it. You've only got 30 more days. I just know it. There's no way to change that. You've got 30 more days. Here's my question. Knowing that reality, thinking of that reality, here's what I want to ask you. What would you start doing that you're not doing right now? If you only had, this is a great exercise. I would encourage you to do it around the table at lunch or at home this week. If we really only had, if you believed you knew you only had 30 days left, what would you start doing that you're not doing right now? And think about it and write it down. Now, just as importantly, what would you stop doing that you are doing right now? If you knew you only had 30 days left, you got a limited amount, it's 30 days, what would you stop doing that you are doing right now? And whatever your answers are to those two questions, you know what? You probably ought to start following them. Because in spite of culture's deception to the contrary, you have a limited amount of time. There is an expiration date stamped on you somewhere, okay? That is reality. And so here's the prophetic warning I believe that God was giving to Belshazzar and his generation. Here's the prophetic warning I believe he's giving to our generation. Number your days because your days are numbered. Number your days because your days are numbered. Don't buy into culture's deception that it doesn't matter how you live. Don't buy into the lie that you got all the time in the world to do whatever you want now and you can get to that other later. That kind of thinking will destroy your life. Instead, number your days because your days are numbered. Amen, Pastor. Good preaching. I'll say it even if nobody else will. Okay. Here's the second word and the second warning. Tekel, okay, that's the Hebrew word. It literally means weighed. You've been weighed on the balances and have not measured up. Daniel's saying, Belshazzar, listen, here's the prophetic warning. Your life has been weighed on the balances and it's not measured up. The way you spend your time, the way you spend your money, the way you spend your energy, the way you live your life has been weighed on the balances of God, and it's not weighed up. It's not measured up. So here's the question I think we should be asking ourselves today, right now, in this room. If we were asked by God, right now, if we were asked by God about the way we're spending our time, the way we're spending our energy, the way we're spending our abilities, the way we're spending our money. If we were asked for God in this room, would any of us be able to say, God, I'm nailing it. I am nailing it. I mean, I've got it, God. I'm spending just the right amount of time with God and just the right amount of time with my family. I'm spending just the right amount of money on my entertainment and just the right amount of money on my generosity. And I've got my work life in balance, and I've got my home life in balance, and I've got my financial life in balance. I'm nailing it, God. Anybody here? Then please hear the prophetic warning. Please hear the prophetic warning. Balance your life because your life is in the balance. Balance your life because your life is in the balance. When we buy into culture's deception, we end up not spending our lives the way we should. We end up not spending our resources the way we should. We end up spending our abilities not the way we should. And that is a very dangerous place for us to be. Now, I know that this has been kind of heavy, so I want to lighten it up by giving you some statistics. Somebody got paid to figure this out. This is what cracks me up. Somebody got paid to figure out how you and I, typical Americans in this country, spend our time. Isn't this great? Here's the average American. Watch this. The average American eats out 14,411 times, including 1,811 of them at McDonald's. That'll kill you right there. But that's us. Okay, how about this one? Spend watching television. We will watch television in our lifetime. 13 years and 4 months of our life is going to be spent watching TV. And they call it the boob tube for a reason. I don't want to go there. I don't know why they call it that for a reason. Anyhow, catch this. We will spend at least the equivalent of 6 solid years on social media. 6 solid years of our life. will wait in line for 5 solid years. And I think I'm already at the max. And we'll be stuck in traffic, moving nowhere for 3 full months. And I'm thinking, I looked at that one and went, nah, how about 3 decades is what it feels like, right? Or this one. We will look for misplaced items for a solid 1 year of our life. Some of you, that's going to be closer to 2, right? Come on. Fess up. Go ahead and point at somebody if you need to today. That's you. And then this one that really got me. I actually added this one up myself. We will drive for 627,000 miles over our lifetime, which, if you measure it out, is 25 times around the world. And I thought that, there's no way. And so I just went backwards through all the cars I've owned and how many miles I put on them. I passed right by 627,000. I thought, oh, dear God. You know, this is how we typically, this is us now, how we typically spend our lives. Question is, should that be the way we spend our lives? And that's just our time, folks. That's just our time. We could talk about our money. We could talk about our abilities. We could talk about our influence. If you are like the average American, if you're like the average American, you are trying to see how much you can cram into one day. You're just trying to cram a little bit more, cram a little bit more, do a little bit more, we got to get the kids in 6 different sports. We got to make sure that we get in 3 different things. We got to go on 5 different trips. We got to make sure that we go to all these extremes. We're just shoving more and shoving more and shoving more into our lives. And I'm giving you a serious prophetic warning. If you don't stop the constant push for more, for adding one more thing into your life, to sticking one more thing in your schedule, it will destroy you. If you're burning your candle at both ends, you are not as bright as you think you are. Okay? See, I thought that was good, Ken. I kind of like that one. I said that in church one time, and somebody showed up the next week and brought me a candle that had a wick on both ends that had been turned up to where you could burn the candle at both ends. I said, proves my point. You're not as bright as you think you are. We need to balance our lives because our lives are out of balance. True? Is that true? We need to balance our lives because our lives are out of balance. In light of the fact that my days are numbered and that my life matters for something other than my pleasure and my fun and me, since I only have a limited number of days, I need to balance my life, or my life will be out of balance. And that leads to the third and final prophetic word that was written on the wall. Parson means divided. Now, some of your translations say Perez, which is only the singular of the plural parson. And that word parson literally means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Daniel was saying, Belshazzar, you haven't listened to God's warnings. So your life is about to come apart. That's what's going to happen. That means, for you, that means the kingdom is going to be carved up by our enemies, the Medes and the Persians. And by this point in time, Medes and Persians were the next biggest guy on the block, and they've been kind of moving around, trying to take over and so forth. And he's going, because you have not listened to the warning, your life is not only going to come apart, the whole kingdom's going to come apart and be divided up and taken over by our enemies. And I believe that the prophetic warning being given here is for us here today, in this room, listening on the radio. Here, if we do not realize that our days are numbered, and if we do not get our lives in balance, we're going to see our lives divided. We're going to see something destroyed in our lives. It may destroy your future options that you have. If you go ahead and do that thinking there's no consequence, it may destroy the future options you have in your life. What may be destroyed for you is your family may come apart. You make that choice thinking there's no consequences of it, it may destroy your family. It may destroy your health. It may destroy your finances. It may destroy your peace. In Belshazzar's case, it destroyed his kingdom. And by the way, go fact check this one. And you will find out that is exactly what happened. These Medes and Persians, who were from what is now modern day Iran, they invaded Babylon, which is where modern day Iraq is. And they took over in 539, just like Daniel said would happen. A new kingdom and a new king took over, and we'll talk about them next week. But here's the prophetic warning in the face of our culture's illusion. Notice the warning signs, because the warning signs are your notice. God is putting you on notice. God is putting you on notice. He's giving you warning signs. So notice your warning signs, because those warning signs are God's notice to you that things are out of balance. The warning signs are there. Probably very little of what I've said so far today is something that's brand new to your thoughts. The warning signs have been there. But culture has a way of deceiving us into thinking, but it won't happen to me. That happens to other people, but that won't happen to me. It's your, listen, you can do that. Have it your way. Culture has a way of deceiving us into believing that consequences won't happen to us. But here is the reality. There will be consequences for your choices. We are free to make our choices. We're just not free to choose the consequences of our choices. First we make our choices, then our choices make us. So God comes along and says, hey, I'm giving you a warning here. I'm giving you a warning. I'm trying to throw up some warning signs for you. And he gives those to us. He's saying, listen, if you continue to ignore the warning signs, then division and destruction is going to come. And God is good. God is so good to us that before he lets that destruction come, he will give us those warning signs. And I was thinking about this going, okay, Russell, but help people understand, what might the warning signs look like when the red flags are going off in your life? What might those red flags, what might those tornado sirens look like in our lives today? And I just thought to myself, well, here's some that I think are the more common ones that we need to see as warning signs. Example, the risk of sinful choices increases. If you're finding yourself being tempted more than you ever were, that's a warning sign. That's when you find yourself giving in to temptations more. That's a warning sign your life is out of balance. I mean, anyone ever find that when you're just worn down and you've been trying to do too much and you've been doing too much, that you get tempted more than you do before? Anybody notice that yet? If you haven't, you ought to notice it, okay? Because it's a warning sign. It's a warning sign. A prophetic warning sign from God. Let me give you another one. Your emotions become inconsistent. Your emotions are inconsistent. You begin flying off the handle. You start getting mad at things you didn't get mad at. You start yelling at cars that cannot hear your voice. Okay? I mean, that is a warning sign. It's your body and your soul and your God telling you, warning, you're out of balance. Let me give you another one. You become less productive. If you don't honor the principles of keeping your life in balance, the balance between work and rest, if you don't honor it, you will become less and less productive. It's called the law of diminishing resources. Go look it up. Fact check me on this one. The more you get out of balance and you don't keep balance and rest together, you will become less and less productive. It will take you longer and longer to do the same thing. God was serious when he put that thing called Sabbath into place in our lives to balance work and rest. But if you're taking your Sabbath and you're trying to cram everything into it you can, in fact, we'll skip church today and we'll just listen on the radio as we go do something else because we got to cram that and we want to run over there, so we'll forget about that and we'll just do all that in that day. And you know what, you ignore the warning, you'll find yourself becoming less and less productive. That's a warning sign. It's a warning sign something is out of balance. But here's the one that really concerns me. You can't hear the voice of God. God is a speaking God. God does not have a speaking problem. We have a hearing problem. And I just know that the more my life is out of balance, the harder it is to hear from God. The more I let my life get out of balance, the more I fail to notice the warning signs, the more I let my life get consumed by it. It's harder to hear God's voice when I got everything else crammed in there. When I'm off on one of these, I'm way off here where I shouldn't be. I'm gone down a road I shouldn't go down. I'm wondering, God, how come I can't hear you? Well, you're not over here. It's a warning sign. It's a prophetic warning sign. And all of these warning signs are messages of God. And the message is very simple. Notice the warning signs, because the warning signs are your notice. They are putting you on notice. So, how should we respond to the warning signs? Well, let me answer that one by saying this. Whatever you do, don't respond the way Belshazzar did. Because here's what we read. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was dressed in purple robes, a gold chain was hung around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Exactly what Daniel said. Don't do that. I don't want that. Don't even do that. Basically, Belshazzar ignored everything that Daniel said. He just kept right on going, living with the deception, like there's not going to be any consequences to his choices and his actions. He just kept right on going. But notice what happened. That very night, Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, was killed. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. In other words, I want you to know exactly when this happened in history. Go fact check this. This is what exactly happened. Belshazzar ignored the warning signs. He held on to the deception. And it cost him his life and the kingdom. So what can we learn from that today? How could we respond differently to the warning signs? Well, let me quickly give you 3 thoughts and then we'll close in prayer. I think one way that we could respond is to live with a sense of purpose and urgency. Begin living with a sense of purpose and urgency. If your days are numbered, and if your life really does matter, and hear me, it matters. It matters to God. It matters to others. Your life, if that's the case, if you're still drawing breath, it's because God still has something He wants to do in you and something He wants to do through you. You have a purpose, so live with a sense of purpose. I sincerely believe that if you'll do that, hear this, I believe that if you'll do that, it actually will solve the problems you face, because you'll discover something in your life that's bigger than your problems. Make your life count for something, because your life is not all about you. It's not all about your next thrill. It's not all about the next vacation you take. It's not all about the next possession you get. Your life's not about you. Live with a sense of purpose and urgency. This might be your last day. This might be your last month. This might be your last year. So live with a sense of urgency. Don't wait. Don't put it off. Another suggestion. Put first things first. Put first things first. If you're going to get your life in balance, you got to put first things first. Start with the most important things and put them in your life first, because order determines capacity. Learn that one. Order determines capacity. And when it comes to the first of those first things, make sure that that first of the first things is God. Give Him the first part of your day. Give Him the first part of your finances. Give Him the first part of your efforts. Give Him the first part of your love. Give Him the first part of your devotion. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and I'll take care of the rest of the stuff. You know who said that? Jesus. Put first things first. Put first things first. Yeah, quickly. You remember, I was thinking about this, the guy talking about when his kids would come up to him and want money. He said, I believe not just giving kids money, I believe them making them work for the money. And so I had my son who was just dying to come up with some money. I said, okay, I'll pay you to clean out the garage. And when I said clean out the garage, he said I meant that you took everything out of the garage, you swept the floor, you washed the floor, and then you put everything back into the garage. And I said, but I remember you put the biggest things back first. You don't go out and pick up the screwdriver and take it in and put it down. No, you get the tool chest in there first that the screwdriver goes in. Otherwise, you won't get everything back into the garage. Makes sense, doesn't it? Put first things first. And make sure that the first of those first things is God. And then the final thought is this. If you've got some warning signs, warning alarms going off in your life, if you inside of your marriage, inside of your finances, inside of your job, there's some warning alarms going off, then one piece of advice that I want you to hear and hear clearly is this. Don't put it off. Do it now. Do it today. God is speaking to some of you right now. Don't put it off. In fact, stop moving. Quit putting your stuff away. Just stop and listen to me. God is speaking to some of you right now. Don't ignore it. Don't put it off. Very first book of the Bible, God says, I will not always strive with men and women. In other words, God will give you the warning. He'll give you the warning. He'll give you the warning. He'll give you the warning. But it comes a point where, like any good parent, he says, that's it. I'm going to let you face the consequences. And God in His grace and God in His goodness and God in His love is sending some alarms and setting off some alarms in some souls today. He's saying, warning! Don't put it off. Do it now. Father, I'm asking you to just...